Hi, and welcome everyone to our briefing today, Where Clean Energy Tax Credits Stand. I'm Dan Bursett. I'm the president of the Environmental and Energy Study Institute. EESI was founded by a bipartisan group of members of Congress, and since 1984, we have worked to provide information about environmental, clean energy, and climate change topics to policymakers and the public. We do our best to ensure that our resources are always timely, relevant, accessible, and practical. We put a lot of thought into making sure those resources are always science-based and ready when congressional staff need the information. The best way to keep up with everything that we do is to subscribe to our biweekly newsletter, Climate Change Solutions, and follow us on Blue Sky and Instagram at EESI Online to make sure you never miss out on anything, whether it's our briefings or articles or podcasts or other resources. Speaking of briefings, we do a lot of briefings. This is actually our last briefing of calendar year 2025. And over the course of the year, we have covered a ton of topics, including transportation policy, extreme heat, demands on the energy grid, industrial process decarbonization, and of course the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change negotiations at COP30 in Brazil. And that's just a sampling of the briefings that we've covered this year, or that we've organized this year. All of our resources are always available online at www.eesi.org. You can go and you can rewatch any of our live casts, you can read summary notes, you can review presentation materials, and everything is always available and free. And of course, again, Climate Change Solutions is a great way to keep up with everything that we do. On the screen right now is a QR code and a link. We will put this up at the end of our briefing as well, but if anyone has any comments about our briefing today or any of our briefings, you can fill out the survey. It only takes a couple minutes. We absolutely read every response. It's very, very helpful to us to help us keep up with what we need to do. You can, if you have any issues with audio, visual, or ideas for future topics, we're very glad to hear them. We have three amazing panelists, and we will have time at the end of their panel, their presentations for questions and answers. Follow us on social media at EESI Online. If you'd like to ask us a question, you can do it that way. You can also send us an email, and the email address to use is ask, that's A-S-K, at eesi.org. We will do our best to incorporate your questions into the Q&A at the end of the panel. The story of our briefing today is What Congress Giveth, Congress Can Taketh Away. That's the story of a suite of clean energy tax incentives first provided or updated and expanded by the Inflation Reduction Act, and then earlier this year, changed or ended by the budget reconciliation process. And we're talking about a wide range of clean energy sectors that have been significantly affected by the ups and downs of the past few years. Everything from electric vehicles to renewable energy to biofuels to hydrogen to nuclear energy, energy efficiency, and more. With help from our expert panelists, we will take stock of where these clean energy tax incentives stand as of the end of 2025, and learn about how companies and consumers are adapting to this new landscape in the near and long term. As you might imagine, given all the talk of rising electricity and natural gas prices, the status of these tax incentives is a big part of the energy affordability story and interconnected in countless ways across the big and complicated US energy systems and all of the markets that serve it. So without any further ado, we're going to jump right in and hear from our first panelist. Seth Hanlon is a senior fellow at the Tax Law Center at NYU Law. Before joining the Tax Law Center, Seth served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Tax and Climate Policy at the U.S. Department of Treasury. That's where he helped lead the implementation of the clean energy tax incentives under the Inflation Reduction Act. Seth has also worked at the Center for American Progress and served as Special Assistant to the President for Economic Policy, where he coordinated the Obama administration's tax policies. Seth has also worked on Capitol Hill as a senior tax counsel for the Democrats on the House Budget Committee and tax counsel for former Senator Debbie Stabenow of Michigan. Seth, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll turn it over to you. I'm really looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I was going to start by setting the table and going and giving a kind of broad overview of how the legislation this summer, the Budget Reconciliation Bill, HR 1, OB3, whatever you want to call it, changed the clean energy tax incentive landscape before we get into more detail on certain topics. So I guess we can go to the first slide. I thought it'd be helpful just, before we go into what OB3 did, just to do a quick rewind to 3 years ago and the Inflation Reduction Act. So the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, landmark legislation, both created and enhanced tax credits for a variety of clean energy related, climate related areas of the economy, clean vehicles and infrastructure, home energy efficiency and clean energy generation, domestic clean energy manufacturing, clean fuels, and carbon capture. The IRA also enhanced these credits with new bonuses. Most of the credits are 5 times bigger if certain labor rules are met. And then for the generation credits and energy storage credits, there are bonuses for domestic content and for location in energy communities and low-income communities. IRA created 2 novel and very important mechanisms that essentially extend the benefit of clean energy incentives to tax-exempt and government entities, whereas before it was really only businesses with sufficient, and also startup and early stage companies, whereas before really only larger, more established businesses could benefit. And then last, IRA put in place these credits by and large for about a decade through 2032 or 2032-ish. So let's go to the next slide. So, OB3 made some major changes. I think the most drastic was that it really abruptly eliminates the incentives that go directly to consumers. So the consumer clean vehicle credits are already expired at the end of September. The residential incentives expire at the end of this calendar year, and things need to be installed by the end of this calendar year. So basically running out of time. Home EV charging equipment needs to be placed in service by next June. Next slide. So then it also, turning to the business side, some of the incentives are also eliminated abruptly and or given pretty short runways, which is going to has created urgency to take advantage of these incentives that we'll talk more about. The commercial vehicles credit already phased out. EV charging equipment still have until next June. Commercial buildings energy efficiency you have until next June to begin. Wind and solar, I think importantly, were really singled out for an abrupt phase out under OB3. So projects need to begin construction by next July 4th, 1 year after enactment, or be placed in service, in other words, come online by the end of 2027. And we'll talk more about that July 4th deadline and what it means to begin construction, which has become really, really key at this time. And then the clean hydrogen credit was shortened by 5 years, so projects need to begin construction by the end of 2027. Next slide. Okay, so some of the business incentives, and this is turning to the better news. Some of the business incentives still have long runways, and I think it's important, for stakeholders to know that there really are significant opportunities that continue even after OB3. So first, the incentives for the investment credit for ground source heat pumps still has into next decade to take advantage of that. And not only that, but those aren't ground source heat pumps aren't subject to the prohibited foreign entity rules that I'll touch on in a minute. Energy storage also maintains a long runway into the next decade, so can claim the valuable investment tax credit, including storage that is connected to solar and wind projects, even as the solar and wind credits are even after the solar and wind credits are phased out. And then other zero emissions technologies, besides for wind and solar, like geothermal power, hydropower, new nuclear, fuel cells, those still have the very long runway into next decade, all to begin construction. Next slide, please. And then OB3 didn't change the duration of several other of the business incentives and even extended one of them. So the carbon capture credit, the credit for existing nuclear facilities, the clean energy manufacturing credit with the exception of wind components, the duration is unchanged. And then the clean fuels credit was actually extended for 2 more years through 2029. And there are some policy changes with some of these credits that we can maybe discuss later, but I'll keep moving in the interest of time. Sorry, next slide. The bonuses and those important direct pay and transferability mechanisms are unchanged. So that means tax-exempt government entities can still take advantage of the credits. Now, of course, the underlying credits have changed, and if the underlying credits are being phased out, then they can. But to the extent that they can, those credits are still in place, tax-exempt government entities can still benefit, and there are still these important bonuses. Next slide, please. So OB3 did make significant policy changes. I think one of the most significant that stakeholders are grappling with right now is the introduction of new restrictions on several of the credits that are called the prohibited foreign entity rules. And sometimes people call them the foreign entity of concern rules, or FEOC. But they're referring to the prohibited foreign entity rules. These are novel, really complicated, and really unclear rules. And so they've injected some major uncertainty for clean energy projects. There are 3 categories of rules that apply to the clean electricity production and investment tax credits, and to the Section 45X clean energy manufacturing credit. Entity level rules that look to, for example, whether an entity has ownership by Chinese individuals or Chinese companies in its ownership chain, or influenced in some manner by Chinese entities. Payments rules that have to do with contracts and IP licensing. And material assistance rules that look to the supply chains of clean energy facilities, the building of clean energy facilities, and also manufacturing. So we're happy to discuss these in more detail. But suffice it to say, for now, these are very, very complicated rules that projects are finding ways to deal with right now. And then just the entity level rules apply to a few of the other credits, as you can see there on the slide. But then none of the prohibited foreign entity rules apply to projects that began construction before 2025. And also, as I mentioned, for ground source heat pumps. Those are none of the new rules, PFE rules apply there. We can go to the next slide, which I really meant as a reference. I'm not, in the interest of time, I won't go into detail on these, but we can certainly come back. But just suffice it to say, there is significant uncertainty on issues. Like, for example, you can be a foreign influenced entity if the entity has issued debt, a certain percentage of its debt, to foreign entities of concern, like Chinese citizens or companies. But there's significant uncertainty about what that means, what effective control means, and also how to calculate, the amount of prohibited foreign entity content in a supply chain. Very complex, with a lot of uncertainty. Next slide, please. And then, so to come back to wind and solar, and this will segue to Jillian, who will talk more about this. But as I mentioned, there's this July 4th, 2026 deadline for wind and solar projects to begin construction. And they're going to want to meet that deadline if they aren't sure that they can be placed in service by the end of 2027, which might be hard for projects that have, this will take a while to construct, or have uncertainty about how long they'll take. And so there's this all important beginning of construction deadline, July 4th. 3 days after OB3 was enacted, President Trump issued an executive order that essentially said, to Treasury and IRS, you need to enforce this deadline very strictly. And then in August, the IRS issued guidance that singles out wind and solar just for this particular purpose and changes the longstanding meaning of what it means to be, for a project to begin construction, to make it harder or take away one of the ways that projects can establish that they began construction. So this is another challenge that stakeholders are dealing with right now. And then also projects, not just wind and solar, but all generation projects have until the end of just until the end of this year to begin construction to avoid those material assistance supply chain rules. So that's another key deadline that's coming up very fast. So with that, that's just an overview. Looking forward to getting more into the conversation.
That was a great overview, actually, Seth. Thank you very, very much for that. And you presented great slides. As a reminder to our audience, the live cast will be posted on our webpage, our website, www.eesi.org. Seth's slides are also available. They're actually available now if you want to download them, because there's a ton of great information. And I also have a hunch we'll come back to some of those topics, whether they're in other presentations or during the Q&A. If you have a question for Seth or our other panelists, you can send us an email, and the email address to use is ask, that's ask@eesi.org, and we'll do our best to get to them. Next up is Jillian Blanchard. Jillian is Lawyers for Good Government's Vice President of Climate Change and Environmental Justice, and she's a nationally recognized attorney in energy and natural resources law. In her role at Lawyers for Good Government, she has managed over 600 lawyers to help provide critical guidance to cities, states, and nonprofit partners to help expedite the country's shift to a clean and equitable green economy and address environmental justice. Over the past year, Jillian has led a team that has provided direct legal assistance to over 500 climate and environmental justice entities that have had funding impacted by the administration. Jillian, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. I really appreciate everyone taking the time. We can dive right in. Seth provided an incredible overview of what happened with OBBB or HR1. I will probably call it HR1 just for ease, but you'll know that it's the same thing, to see what the impact has been in the clean energy, renewable energy space and the energy efficiency landscape. So on this slide, if you're not familiar with Lawyers for Good Government, we are a national nonprofit that has about 125,000 legal advocates in all 50 states, and we work in areas, as Dan said, trying to expedite that shift to a green economy. And I have had the benefit of actually providing technical assistance to over, at this point, 800 municipalities, states, schools, and communities on things like these clean energy tax credits, as well as clean energy funding generally. Next slide, please. So as Seth already described beautifully what the table looks like that's been set. I'm going to zero in on the impacts for the stakeholders that we work most closely with, the tax exempt entities, the solar industry writ large. And the phase outs that Seth has identified are most relevant to these entities because these are the projects that they do most often. So wind and solar, those phase outs are extremely relevant to all of the stakeholders that we work with that are going to have to deal with that. The EV phase out is a big deal for fleet transitions. The energy efficiency phase out has impacted the solar industry and a lot of municipalities as well, electric vehicle charging, and then the complicated prohibited foreign entity rules, which really are most impacting on wind, solar, and storage. Next slide, please. Okay, so the immediate reaction, as you might imagine, and as Seth said very clearly, is uncertainty, confusion. These things breed fear, and they sometimes breed inaction. So there's confusion around the prohibited foreign entity rules, as well as around the timeline. Some folks say that the credits are absolutely gone by the end of this year. That's just not correct. As Seth clearly said, you have to start construction by next year for wind and solar. Or you can place in service before 2027. So there's a lot of different runways. They're just shorter and more complicated. And of course, there's a lot of confusion around prohibited foreign entities. As I said, the loss of that electric vehicle credit is a really big hit to a lot of the municipalities, schools, states that are trying to do fleet transitions. They already had them in the works. think of your white and yellow municipal vehicles. All of those have now become more expensive and more costly. We're seeing a reduction in utility scale solar and wind just because of the uncertainty, which I'll go into in a minute. There's a question about supply because some of the larger solar industry folks and wind folks are trying to get things to begin construction before the end of the year, which means that they're buying up a lot of the available components that are compliant with some of the domestic content requirements or prohibited foreign entity requirements, or even BABA, Build American, Buy American requirements, which leads smaller projects to, not have as much availability. The big impact to consider is the impact on the secondary lending market, because it wasn't just tax credits that were hit. It was big grant programs that were really meant to spark investment and to give confidence to the secondary lending market, like the banks, to invest in green finance. Those have all been hit by this uncertainty. Next slide. Oh, it looks like we skipped a slide. All right, well, go ahead, go forward, it's all right. So the power project cancellations by technology, you can see how this has been impacted. It looks like it's 200, the greatest number is in solar or storage and wind. There's a combined 266 gigawatts of generation capacity that have been canceled in 2025, which might not sound like a lot, but it's actually 25% of the current US electricity generation. So it's a big hit to just grid resilience, to actually supply of electricity. And of course, 93% of that is going to be in the clean energy space. Next slide. This is the slide I also want to keep in mind. The longer term reactions that we're seeing to HR1 is kind of impacts in the growth and capacity. So we were seeing before HR1 record deployment, 49 gigawatts added in 2024 alone, job increases, 3.6 million jobs, and growing affordability, because when there's additional electricity and opportunity like low income solar, electricity just becomes more affordable. It's less expensive than some of the fossil fuel options, or at least it was. And now post HR1, that is shifting. We're seeing a shift. The investment lost, as I said, there's less confidence on the part of the banks and the secondary market to invest in these projects. So there's a significant loss of investment, job stagnation regarding clean energy jobs that have been lost or stalled. And then, of course, the increased cost, right? You don't have as much electricity. It becomes more expensive. You don't have low income options. It just becomes more expensive. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to zero in on the impacts to the stakeholders that we work with the most, and very happy to follow up with any questions folks might have on any of these particular buckets. But there's a lot of overlap, so I'll go as quickly as I can, like nonprofits and religious institutions. Think of your climate resilience hubs. A lot of churches, for example, were contemplating and building little local community resilience hubs with solar. Those projects have become much more expensive. As Seth said, the elective pay or direct pay provisions in the IRA have stuck around post HR1. So the mechanism for accessing the credits are still available. It's still available, but the underlying credit, which they use most often, is phasing out and has become more expensive because it's more difficult to get some of those upfront loans. So the solar installation and energy retrofits may no longer be financially viable. Their capital stack has become more vulnerable. Same is true with municipalities and school districts and universities. They have a little bit more budget to work with, but their EV fleet transition has been significantly hit by the phase out of EVs. The other issue that Seth touched upon that I really want to uplift, that we're tracking closely, is what we call the municipal debt issue. How do you define prohibited foreign entity when it involves the holders of municipal or state or municipal debt? And so a lot of these entities like school districts, they don't even know who is holding their debt. It could be a Chinese individual or an entity, and how do they make that analysis in a safe way to protect them from foreign entity rules that are unclear? So we're really looking for best practices and guidance on how to address that burgeoning issue that municipalities, school districts, universities, even if you can believe it or not, states are trying to grapple with, because they have lots of different holders of their municipal and governmental debt. Okay, next slide. Similar, as I said, to states, all of the other issues around affordability and EV fleet transition also apply to states, but they have the additional piece of homes and HERA questions. Those are the energy efficiency state rebate programs. Some of them are funded, some of them are in question, some of them are stalled. And that combined with the energy efficiency phase out is really posing a lot of financial issues for states and those programs. They're looking for ways to fill the gaps, but it's becoming more difficult. We're seeing a little bit more appetite for nuclear, and I'm sure Kate's going to talk about some of those things that are becoming more available to folks. On the solar industry side, we're really seeing this need and this push, this mad dash to start construction before the end of the year to make sure they can avoid the more onerous material assistance rules, as well as get a longer runway to complete their wind and solar projects. So that those PFE rules apply to solar, wind, storage, geothermal, not ground source heat pumps, but geothermal. And it's impacting residential solar, reducing homeowner demand, et cetera. So it's a lot of issues that the supply chain and the market is trying to address, but it needs certainty. The market loves certainty. So it's just leading to delays, cancellations, and reduced investment. Next slide, which is my final slide. So I'll wrap up. Okay, so things to keep in mind now. Uncertainty around the PFE issue, as well as what HR1 has done, is really the key barrier. There are a lot of available dollars with respect to clean energy, but people need help using them, even more help than they needed before. So we have a QR code there for the free pro bono resources that L4GG provides with its attorneys, its tax attorneys, through our elective pay sprint hub. Please feel free to share this with any tax exempts you know who are grappling with these issues. We're very happy to help. I'm happy to share more in the Q&A if folks have questions. We're really looking forward to seeing what the guidance might look like on prohibited foreign entity. As Seth mentioned, we're expecting some before the end of the year. We're not sure how detailed it'll be, but that hopefully will help provide some certainty to the market. And then we're also tracking these market shifts, right? We're seeing manufacturers provide certifications on compliance, et cetera. And we're not sure how Treasury is going to react to those things. We're tracking it all very, very closely, but it still remains to be seen how impactful it will be and how the market responds. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you and happy to answer any questions.
That's great, Jillian. Thank you so much. A lot of the topics that have come up either in Seth's presentation or Jillian's presentations or about to come up in Kate's presentation, we covered these topics in a lot of different briefings. And so we're going to be covering topics related to grid modernization and grid optimization early next year. We will be we work with the Business Council for Sustainable Energy to do briefings or a briefing around the Sustainable Energy in America Fact Book, which is a great snapshot of the clean energy sector in the U.S. So even if we don't have another tax incentive briefing coming up in the next couple months, we will absolutely have other briefings. And I think there'll be some opportunities to provide some status updates and maybe see some additional clarity on some of the issues that Jillian just outlined. That brings us to our third panelist. Katelyn Dean is a research specialist at the EFI Foundation. Kate's work focuses on advancing the clean energy transition by researching innovative policy support mechanisms at the state and federal levels, including procurement of clean commodities and strategies for improving federal energy technology policy implementation. Before joining EFI Foundation, Kate was an energy and market analyst with the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. While there, she authored 2 agency-wide pathways to commercial liftoff reports, things we've covered in other briefings, on clean hydrogen and sustainable aviation fuel. And before transitioning to energy policy, Kate researched the air quality, health, and economic impacts of wildfire smoke. Kate, thanks for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to your presentation.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Great. Well, I am very excited to be here. My name is Kate Dean. I'm a research specialist at the EFI Foundation, and I'm very excited to be here to talk to you about the clean energy tax credit landscape and impacts that recent changes have had for energy industries. So if you go to the next slide. A big disclaimer, I'm not from the industry side of things. I'm coming to you today from the EFI Foundation, which is a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit. Our office is actually right over by the Farragut West Metro stop. So if you're on the hill, it's not too far away. And we are a small but mighty organization that was founded in 2017 by former U.S. Secretary of Energy, Secretary Moniz. And we focus on providing evidence-based, pragmatic solutions for the world's toughest energy challenges. The graphic on the right here shows some of the numbers behind the things we do, like putting out reports and organizing workshops and providing energy expertise to those across the federal government. Okay, next slide. I'm going to start here with an executive summary, or the bottom line up front. I'm going to walk through 4 different industries today that were impacted by recent tax credit changes: hydrogen, carbon management, biofuels, and nuclear. The hydrogen industry has faced setbacks with recent tax credit changes and is largely experiencing a cooling effect. The changes for carbon management have been generally positive, especially for CO2 utilization projects, which we'll talk more about. And for biofuels, also generally a positive reaction, but the updates may present some challenges specifically for the sustainable aviation fuel industry. And then finally, for nuclear, changes have been generally positive, but there are some potential concerns for long-term investments and compliance, as others have noted on this call, for an entity of concern rules. So the next slide. So we'll kick it off with hydrogen. The main relevant tax credit for hydrogen production is 45V. And the main change in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act for 45V was the shift in the date of eligibility from 2033 up to 2027 that Seth mentioned earlier. This means that a project has to begin construction by 2027 in order to claim the credit. The shortened runway for eligibility reduces low carbon hydrogen's cost competitiveness. And this graph on the right here shows the estimated cost of different methods of hydrogen production over time and the cost reduction benefit that's afforded by the tax credit. Low carbon hydrogen, in pink and blue and green on this figure, as you can see, is much more expensive than traditional hydrogen production methods. The tax credit helps alleviate this. With the previous longer eligibility, the industry had a stronger potential to be cost competitive with traditional hydrogen production, shown in this little graph in gray, before the credit ran out. But the shortened runway reduces this potential. Next slide. Broadly, policy uncertainty has cooled investment and led to many project cancellations for the low carbon hydrogen industry. This map on the right here shows announced or planned hydrogen production projects, low carbon hydrogen production projects, I should say, as of June of this year. At the time, there were a little over 200-ish projects, and 50 of them had already been canceled or stalled in June of this year, largely citing policy uncertainty. And this was for several reasons. A slow implementation of the original 45V guidance slowed project development, and many hydrogen projects remain in very early development, which means that they're also potentially unable to begin construction by the earlier deadline of 2027 to claim the credit, which could lead to more hydrogen project cancellations over time without any other intervention. Next slide. Okay, moving on to carbon management. The main relevant tax credit here is 45Q. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act increases the 45Q tax credit for point source carbon capture and direct air capture operations, which utilize captured CO2 rather than permanently storing it. So previously, in the IRA, the credit was lower if a company planned to utilize CO2 rather than permanently store it. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act removed this lower category, meaning companies can receive the same credit whether they plan to store or utilize the captured carbon. And so these changes have 2 main effects. One, preserving this credit is really helpful for the nascent carbon capture industry, and it supports continued growth into the market for both the point source carbon capture and the direct air capture industry. Further, increasing the credit for utilization incentivizes utilization over storage, because storage is pretty costly, while utilizing the captured CO2 can actually be profitable for industry. So if they have the same credit from like a financial standpoint, a company is probably more likely to decide to utilize the captured CO2 rather than decide to permanently store it. Okay, next slide. Okay, now moving on to biofuels. Here we're talking about the 45Z tax credit. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the main change here was, as Seth mentioned, extending the tax credit to 2029 when it was originally supposed to end in 2027. And a few other specific changes. Fuel produced after this year must be exclusively derived from North American feedstocks. And the One Big Beautiful Bill Act also eliminated the extra tax credit that was available for producers producing sustainable aviation fuel. So there was previously, I think it was a 75-cent extra benefit that SAF producers could claim. And the chart on the right here is showing carbon intensity and production costs for different types of SAF. So, and I'm illustrating here in these little call-out boxes some relevant impacts of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act changes. So first, changes will likely alter the assigned carbon intensity of the amount of the credit received, because they're tied to each other. However, it could incentivize SAF that is not compliant with carbon rules and mandates that are in other countries, which could present a challenge for the US SAF competitiveness on a global market. Second, the airline industry has razor-thin profit margins. And as this graph is showing, SAF is currently around 2 to 10 times more expensive than fossil jet fuel. And so reducing the extra credit for SAF hinders the industry's ability to reach cost parity, which is really needed in something like the aviation industry with these very thin profit margins. Next slide. So one more quick note here on SAF and 45Z. This map here is showing announced SAF facilities in the US as of last year, including renewable diesel facilities that could be converted to produce SAF in a favorable SAF market. Those are the black dots here are showing currently operational renewable diesel facilities that at the time had no announced plans for SAF. And producers in that situation must constantly choose between renewable diesel and SAF based on economics. And the 45Z updates, because they removed that extra credit for SAF, could favor renewable diesel over SAF production. Next slide. And this is my final slide. We'll end talking on nuclear. These insights are largely from EFI's Nuclear Scaling Initiative, which is an initiative with EFI and some other think tanks around town. And that group put together a few insights on the impacts of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act for nuclear. And there's three main ones highlighted here. So first, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act largely preserves and in some ways strengthens mechanisms for nuclear energy deployment. However, it shortens the tax credit phase-out runway, which may weaken long-term investment for nuclear energy projects. So there's a shortened runway, and nuclear projects take a long time. And so you are considering very long-term investments here. So that uncertainty can cause issues when folks are thinking about investing in nuclear facilities. And then finally, as we've talked about before, both previous speakers touched on this as well, as with other clean energy technologies and other changes in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the foreign entity of compliance implementation creates a lot of uncertainties for the nuclear industry as well. And with that, that concludes my prepared remarks. Thank you for your time, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Kate. I'm looking forward to discussion too. All three of our presenters today had amazing slides. Just as a reminder, the slides are available at www.eesi.org. And within a short amount of time, the live cast will be posted as well if you want to go back and rewatch what Seth had to say, what Jillian had to say, or what Kate had to say. I'll also just take a moment. We have a lot of great resources on sustainable aviation fuel. That's SAF. And so if you want to learn more about the market overall, as well as what airlines are doing to encourage SAF production, we have some really great resources. Our colleague Jeff Overton has always done a great job with those. So I encourage you to check those out. So let's get into the Q&A. And I'd like to start by, I think if we did a word cloud of our briefing today, the big word in the middle would be uncertainty. I don't think that's much of a reach, especially since you all chose to call the HR one something different. That dilutes that a little bit. But we're not just talking about uncertainty with the individual sectors that are involved. All of this is just how we power our economy. And so I'd like to, maybe Seth, we could start with you, and I'd like to sort of go through and sort of highlight some ways that what we've talked about today with respect to the tax incentives because of so much energy policy in the US is accomplished through the tax code, what are some implications for other energy topics that are in the talk or in the news right now on Capitol Hill and off? What are some of the other implications that congressional staff should be thinking about as they start to wrap their heads around what's happening with all these tax incentives? And Seth, we'll start with you, and then we can hear from Jillian and Kate.
Sure. I think a couple things. I mean, I think first, in terms of word clouds overall, like the one word that is on lots of people's tongues is affordability, and that's on people's minds for good reason. Electricity prices are rising and projected to rise as demand for electricity is projected to rise with data centers and AI and other reasons. And so, I mean, I think, when it comes to OB3, the story, the crux of the story is pretty simple, is that if you eliminate the financial incentives for the new sources of electricity that are best positioned to add capacity and add supply in the short and medium term, namely solar and wind, then that's just not going to help with energy affordability, to say nothing of the climate effects. And so, I also fear, taking away the financial incentives as the tax credits compound some of the new regulatory roadblocks for solar and wind that we're seeing under this administration. So, I mean, I think to be clear, if you look at projections, clean energy, including solar and wind, is going to continue to grow. It's going to be a bigger, share of the energy mix, but without these financial incentives, it's not going to grow as fast. There will be less supply, and that is only bad news for affordability. And then I think another point is, I think IRA created a lot of momentum. The Inflation Reduction Act, that is, created a lot of momentum for domestic manufacturing of, in the clean energy industries of the future. There was important like onshoring incentives and friendshoring incentives for EV battery supply chain. And there's the domestic content bonus for the ITC and PTC that incents, domestic manufacturing of clean energy components. And so to the extent that you eliminate the underlying credits or phase them out sooner, you eliminate that incentive. And then the prohibited foreign entity rules, they're aimed at getting moving supply chains away from China, which is, I think, it's a goal that people across the spectrum would agree with. But you need to hit the right sweet spot between rules that are too lax and don't do anything, and rules that impose unnecessary red tape and so much uncertainty that projects can't even get financed and go forward. And then if that happens, then you haven't done anything to help the incentive to move supply chains away from China and help domestic manufacturing. So I fear that the prohibited foreign entity rules go way too far on the red tape side, and that's one of the reasons we're looking out for guidance that can hopefully clarify some of those rules.
Thanks, Seth. Jillian, same question to you. What are some of the impacts of what we've talked about today on some other issues that are on everyone's minds?
Well, not surprisingly, I agree with Seth on all of those issues with respect to uncertainty, affordability, particularly around the issue of data centers. What we're seeing, of course, as everyone's seeing, is the need for increased electricity generation to support those data centers. And as I highlighted, 93% of the generation that happened last year was in clean energy, wind and solar. So if that no longer becomes available, we need to diversify to somehow support these data centers. That's going to increase load. It's going to need more of that diversification, which is then going to increase costs of the average customer who needs to share that diversification, increased load. The other piece that I think is important to note with respect to the prohibited foreign entity, just getting into the practicalities a little bit, is that right now, there really isn't a great battery that is made in the United States, as far as I know. And the market is moving on that. So that has such a significant impact on just storage generally, which is such a backbone of so many of these technologies. So if you don't have a good answer for the storage technology, it impacts a lot of them across, the way. So to Seth's point, I really do think there's a danger that going too far hurts our competitiveness with China, hurts our affordability, hurts our ability to really compete. And then the climate resilience impacts is another piece that we think about a lot, working with communities, because so many entities that have come to us, places you would not expect, in the Southeast, lots of churches that really want to be able to afford to create a community resilience hub in the event of a grid outage in Texas, in the Southeast, in a lot of different places. You might be surprised to hear can't afford to do it anymore. So what we're going to see, unfortunately, in the wake of a more vigorous impacting storms is harder hit communities, because they won't have the resilience hubs, they won't have the power grid backup with solar and storage. And those are the things that we are kind of looking out for. The last thing that I think is very relevant to this whole discussion that I don't think we've talked about yet is the permitting issue, right? Everyone is concerned about the speed of permitting. And the interesting thing is, in order to get your project placed in service, you have to have completed your interconnection. And that permitting interconnection piece is the part that's completely held up in a lot of different places. So those phase out deadlines become far more onerous when you're stuck relying on a utility giving you a permission to operate and you can't get that interconnection agreement. So there's some of these like unique things that, come to the top. The last thing, and then I'll be quiet here because I want to hear from Kate, is kind of the grant termination piece that is just an undeniable part of the capital stack. Billions and billions of dollars that are a piece of making a project, any project, financially viable. A lot of that is just uncertain, stalled. So we're looking to see what happens in the courts to see how those things get resolved.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Jillian. Kate, over to you. What are some of the other topics that are affected by this that are on your mind?
Yeah, it's hard to add to that. Great remarks from both Seth and Jillian. But I agree with both of them, of course. And I think I'll reiterate, some points around affordable energy generation and load growth. We're facing a very unique challenge in the energy sector right now, where we're trying to transform the type of energy that we're putting on the grid and also deal with an amount of load growth that we are not used to dealing with. And these tax credits are directly impacting, the mixture of the energy generation that's going on the grid. And so any small tweaks in them is changing that mixture of things going on the grid. And so when we're thinking about having clean, firm power for these data centers, that also needs to be affordable. These are things that we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about the impact of these tax credits and the impacts of changing them. Another thing that I'll touch on that Jillian also kind of mentioned as well is just the ability for the private sector to be able to bank on government policy, and that's hard to do when there are a lot of changes. These projects, big energy infrastructure projects, are investing in new energy or new sectors like low carbon hydrogen or carbon management, need a lot of lead time. I mean, these projects take like 10 plus years to build, and so these companies are trying to plan with really long lead times, and that's hard to do when there can be a lot of uncertainty and changes in policy. One last thing related to that, it's kind of adjacent, but I don't know that we've mentioned it directly, is the industrial sector. So these tax credits touch the energy sector, but also the industrial sector, with things like hydrogen and carbon management are also used to decarbonize the industrial sector as well. And they're really important for maintaining U.S. manufacturing competitiveness, ensuring that we are, producing reliable products in the U.S. that are also globally competitive in terms of their carbon intensity and cost. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Kate. And we did a briefing not that long ago on industrial decarbonization. So if you want to learn more on that topic, that was a great resource. One thing that I was thinking about while I was listening to all of you talk is all of this requires human beings to do. And so jobs are obviously impacted. We'll be doing an update to our climate jobs fact sheet next year. There are more than 2 million people just in energy efficiency alone, which is the largest slice of the clean energy jobs pie. And Seth, you were talking about onshoring and friendshoring, bringing those jobs here. is bringing jobs here and creating jobs. So that's one sort of cross-cutting thing that I was thinking about too, as you all were speaking. Taking a look at the questions, I'm curious now and we'll mix it up a little bit, Kate, so you don't always have to go last, because that's not fair when you're not competing against Seth and Jillian exactly, but occupying the same panel. One thing I'm curious about, generally is something that Jillian was talking about, and that is sort of geographic. And Kate, you had your map that showed, I'm curious, the renewable diesel and SAF production. Any additional comments on how different parts of the country might be affected? We haven't talked about hydropower, for example. We've talked about, the resilience hubs in the Southeast, but since I know who is our audience today, and it's a pretty diverse group of congressional staff, Kate, Jillian, and Seth, any additional comments on some of the geographic disparities of how these changes to tax incentives are taking place?
I mean, I have some thoughts. I don't want to just jump in, but just to kind of enhance and expand on what I was saying with respect to a lot of the climate resilience hubs, we were seeing a lot of movement in the South, not necessarily with a focus on addressing climate change, but really establishing resiliency and the import of having that backup electricity generation with solar and storage. And that is all kind of slowing down a bit. So I get very concerned with our partners in the Southeast in particular. What will they do in the event of a storm? What will happen? Our friends in Puerto Rico, our friends in Texas, like lots of different places that could have those types of hiccups.
Kate or Seth, any additional comments on maybe some of the regional disparities or regional differences?
I don't think I have anything to add.
I could add, I mean, so there's this, in IRA created the bonus credit for location and energy communities, which are, communities that are historically reliant on, in terms of jobs on fossil fuels, or have coal plants, coal mines or coal plants closed. And so there's an enhanced credit for locating projects in those, in those areas. And Treasury last year had done research, our Office of Economic Policy, that investment in those energy communities was increasing at a higher, more rapid pace than investment, elsewhere, which is what you'd expect, right? So, so anyway, just to the extent that we phase out the PTC and ITC for key technologies like wind and solar, we are removing that incentive for location or at least weakening that incentive for location in energy communities.
That's great. I'm glad you mentioned that, Seth. Thanks. Go ahead, Jillian.
No, I just want to add on to that Seth knows very well that, and one thing we're both tracking is their energy communities bonus still exists, right? And so does the low income communities bonus. But those people manning the portals, as you will, like the actual implementation and approval of those bonuses, which is required in the low income communities bonus, and the allocations that get created on a year-by-year basis are being impacted. So the rules are in place, right? But in practice, it is becoming more difficult to depend on those bonuses.
Thanks. I'm glad you mentioned that. Go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I know I said I didn't have anything to add, but Seth sparked something for me. On the energy community bonus, one update in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act was it expanded these regions to include nuclear communities as well. So that is very relevant for that industry.
So that's how it happens when you have a good panel. They riff on what panelists riff on what each other said. Unfortunately, we only have an hour today. And so I'd like to conclude by maybe doing a bit of a lightning round. And Kate, maybe we could start with you and then hear from Jillian and then wrap up with Seth. Back to the word cloud, uncertainty. Curious, Seth, or Kate, what maybe one or two things that you're looking for either by the end of the year or in the early part of next year? It can be a piece of guidance that's really important for the sectors you covered. Is there going to be an announcement? Anything you're looking for in the next couple weeks that might help address some of the uncertainty and give people a better idea of how this is going to play out?
Yeah, I don't know anything specific, but just generally what you said, like the guidance and the timeliness of the guidance on these credits is crucial. I mentioned that in my remarks that the slow implementation of the final 45V guidance from before was a big hindrance for the hydrogen industry. So for all the guidance that is still forthcoming, the timeliness is very important.
And Jillian, over to you. And also, how much guidance are we actually talking about? Are we talking about, like, is it like 100% of the guidance is outstanding? Is it like 50% of the guidance outstanding? Do you have a sense?
Yeah, I mean, we are waiting on guidance. All federal agencies, we love them, but a lot of them rely on a draft guidance to be sitting around for a long time that folks can use. We are waiting for brand new guidance, though, on the prohibited foreign entity. We anticipate, or at least there's rumors, there'll be skinny guidance before the end of the year. The key will be how much of that guidance actually clears things up, right? How much of it talks about municipal debt? How much of it gives safe harbor tables? How much of it leverages what's already been established through domestic content safe harbor? Like, a lot of that will be very, very helpful in breeding certainty in the market. Those are the big things that are still outstanding in my mind. There is some guidance, as Seth said, that went out in beginning of construction, but there's still some open questions as to how those things will be handled, audits. And then, of course, as I said, longer term, we're looking at some of the outcomes of various court decisions too for additional financing.
Seth?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jillian really said it on the prohibited foreign entity. I mean, I think that's probably the main area where guidance is really needed because of the lack of clarity of the statutory provisions. And so, I hope that they can answer and have good answers for as many, of the key issues, like the municipal debt issue that Jillian mentioned, in the skinny guidance that is rumored to be coming before the end of the year. But there's going to be, like, no doubt there's going to be still many, many unanswered questions because there's just no way to get this complex, guidance on this time frame. It's going to be a long process. We're also looking out for proposed regulations on the Section 45Z clean fuels credit. And then Treasury said the other day there might be guidance on the Section 45Q carbon capture credit, because compliance with that credit is largely dependent on the EPA's greenhouse gas reporting program. Like, you have to kind of use the things that you report to those to GHGRP. And they've announced that they are working to eliminate the GHGRP. So, which obviously is not a good thing in its own right, but it also complicates compliance with 45Q. So we're looking to see what Treasury does on that score.
Okay, so it's a little late in the briefing to ask this question, but you said something, Seth, that you said skinny. You and Jillian both talked about skinny guidance. When we talk about skinny things in this context, we're really talking about half measures. How much certainty could we realistically expect from skinny guidance? We're talking about billions and billions and billions of dollars. We're talking about deploying capital. Do any of the three of you have a sense of that question? Is skinny guidance really going to move the needle for any of the industries that we've talked today, or are we really waiting for everything to be wrapped up?
I mean, I think to the extent that it clearly addresses questions, it can be very impactful. I mean, I think in just if you look back at the clean energy guidance in the past, tax guidance, a lot of it has been in the form of, like, IRS notices and not necessarily like finalized regulations. And industry really does rely on it because it is it is a statement of the IRS's position. So I think skinny guidance can be very helpful to the extent that it clearly answers questions. I think there's just a big question of how much, like, there's just so many unanswered questions and unclear questions in the prohibited, not just in the prohibited foreign entity, but throughout OB3, that, like, there's just no way any guidance on this time frame can answer all of those questions.
Okay, and I assume the industries impacted are in touch with folks at IRS and Treasury and elsewhere, and probably also on Capitol Hill too, right? Like finance and ways and means.
Yeah,
Kate,
absolutely.
Jillian, do you have any? Yeah, go ahead, Jillian, and then
I was
Kate.
just going to say, absolutely. They have been in touch, and they've been kind of sharing what they're hoping to get guidance on.
Okay. Kate, last word. This is your chance. Anything you'd like to leave our audience with?
No, I think Seth and Jillian really covered it. Anything that we're hearing, any guidance is helpful as far as it provides insight for industry and trying to navigate these changes. And looking forward to seeing that hopefully soon.
Good. Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Seth and Jillian and Kate, for being tremendous panelists. This was a massive topic, and it was a little unfair to ask you to cover everything you covered in less than an hour, but you did a great job. Your presentations were great, super informative. Everything is posted online at www.eesi.org. So I encourage you all to take a look at that. And like I said earlier, we'll be covering some of these topics in upcoming briefings as well. So stay with us. I'd also like to thank my colleagues at EESI who made the briefing today possible. So thanks to Dan O, to Omri, Allison, Hannah, Anna, Nicole, and Laura, and Miguel for all their contributions. We are also wrapping up our fall intern semester. So Haley and Olivia, thanks for all your contributions. We also couldn't do this without our videographer, Troy, who lurks in the background, but Troy's awesome. So thank you, Troy, as well. We would like to also just once again ask if you have any feedback. You can use this QR code to take our survey. We read every response. It only takes a couple minutes, but we really appreciate anything you'd like to ask. Sorry we didn't get to all the questions that came in today, but we did get to some of them. And so I'd like to thank everyone. And thanks to everybody who came to EESI briefings in 2025. That's a really big number of people. So thanks for sticking with us. It's been quite a year. We have a great slate of briefings set for 2026. Our first briefing of the year will deal with wildfire resilience. We have a briefing coming up on energy grid modernization and optimization. Of course, we'll be talking about energy affordability in that briefing as well. We also have briefings on energy infrastructure or water infrastructure coming up as well. We have new fact sheets in the works about critical minerals. We have articles coming online, literally, pun intended, about data centers and AI. The best way to keep up with everything that we do and ensure that you never miss anything is to sign up for our bi-weekly newsletter, Climate Change Solutions. You can do that at our website. I think our last issue of the year is next Tuesday. So if you RSVP now, you'll definitely get the wrap-up issue for the year, and then also the first issue whenever we pick back up again in January. And if you're having a hard time thinking about a New Year's resolution that you might actually be able to keep and you're not a subscriber, it's a really easy New Year's resolution. I can really recommend that one. And it's always nice to be able to say you at least followed through on one of your New Year's resolutions and tell your friends. Thanks to everybody. I hope you have a great holiday season. Thanks again to our great panelists and to my colleagues at EESI. Happy holidays, and we'll see you back in 2026. Thanks, everybody.